welcome. Lovely to have you. I just wanted to say that I'm Jemima Burrill and I'm the curator at Now Gallery with my co-curator, Car Charles. We're bringing you some talks about colour. I thought that was a kind of important subject right now with the greyness hanging around. They're very different in theme. We had Camille Walala, and she took us for this extraordinary trip around her studio and talked about her joyful design practice. And we had Joy Gregory on colour in her exquisite photos. And these talks can be found on the website. So I know that India, who is our chief sender outer of relevant links, she'll be sending that out to you. Today we have Simone Brewster. Hello, nice to have you with us. Very excited to be here with you. And then we'll have Liz West in April. I think it's April the 6th. We'll be talking to Kaya about an exciting project, an art installation, a colourful art installation, which has arrived on Greenwich Peninsula. So do look out for that. Just to remind you, as I'm sure you all know how these talks work, we're going to talk. I've got some lovely images to share with you. And we also want your questions. We love having questions from you, and it's so important because we get stuck here, have no idea that actually there's anybody out there, and you need to communicate with us and tell us your thoughts, and we can ask those questions at the end of our presentation and Simone's talk, and Magda will be giving us those questions then. To you, Simone, so lovely to have you here. And I think I decided that I wasn't going to do a sort of massive introduction and tell everybody about you, because I think that that's going to kind of come around during the talk. Yeah. But what I do know is, because we chatted before for the Design District talks, I do know that you are an architect. You trained as an architect and you went to the Royal College, and then you studied design products. And I just love, there was this description that you said of your work. You said they're intimate architectures, creating objects and spaces that utilize architectural principles throughout. So we're actually going to look at your paintings first. I'm just going to go and share I'm not a great multitasker, so I'm just going to share the screen. Give me a second and I will do that. Here you go. She says optimistically, there we go. So there's you, looking particularly gorgeous with very beautiful objects. And we're going to talk about your paintings. So I was interested in your paintings, and you talk about intimate, the sort of intimacy, and also about an architectural influence. And I just wondered if your paintings had an architectural influence. And I believe that you started them during lockdown. You talk about actually that it was a sort of joyful approach to coping with lockdown, getting painting.
Yeah, definitely. You know, lockdown was really strange, and it was also during, we were lucky to have it start, I think, during good times in terms of weather. And so, you know, I didn't have much else I could do from inside my house than start painting. I had ideas, and the only way I could really bring them to the fore would be to paint, really. So that's what I started to do. And I think if you look at the very early paintings I did, you can see maybe some of the architecture there. I was really looking at the female form, abstracting that, breaking it down to really simple lines, and I wasn't too concerned about it being too recognizable when I started out at all. It was extremely abstract, and as I think as I went through the series, because there's 100 in the Women in Part series, as I went through, they became more easily recognizable as body parts. But yeah, definitely looking at how I could deconstruct form and make it really, really simple, basically, and play with the ideas that we have around the female body and why it's recognizable and which bits we recognize, and jumbling them up so they're not necessarily all in order, you know. Yeah, it was definitely, for me, really, really fun. I really just enjoyed enjoyed these paintings and during a time when there was not much else to enjoy. So I kind of jumped in with both feet when I started this. And I was really happy to have the artist support pledge at the time, because it meant that I was less precious about sharing it. I felt like, you know, there was definitely a sense of community happening within the creative industries, and the artist support pledge was great because it was just kind of like, oh, I won't keep this new exploration hidden to myself. I'll share it and just see what people say and what feedback I get. And I was lucky to have really kind of positive feedback so far. So it's been good.
I think we talked about community just before we started this talk, and how much has sort of your community helped in terms of doing something completely new. Because this is, I mean, obviously we've got a drawing of yours later on, but this is quite a different departure from what you're used to doing.
Oh, this has, I mean, if anyone does know my work, I'm really 3D based. And actually, to be honest, so when I came to the Woman in Parts series, it was because I was looking, I want to make some sculptures. That's essentially what's going on inside me. I'm like, I'm actually at the point now where I'm normally making furniture and products, and they're quite sculptural in and of themselves. But I want to step even further in that way. I kind of want to, I have other things to say that I know that if I keep them in the realm of furniture, I can't say it. So I want to start looking at this kind of deconstruction and abstraction, because that's what I was doing with my furniture pieces when I was, I think we might look at some of these pieces anyway. But I want to explore this. And the only means I had to explore this was the page, you know, was painting. And so it was really me looking at how I could start to create images that were about the female body and this deconstructed form that would then be translated again into 3 dimensions. That was the initial intention. And in a way, it still will, because I know that's going to happen, but I didn't know I was going to enjoy it as much as I did.
I mean, you look at this and it's completely visceral. It feels like it's that different thing from designing, where you have a thought, you make the design, and then someone else possibly makes it. This is literally you imprinting onto the paper. And the other thing, because this talk is about colour, blue seems to be a very recurring colour in your oeuvre. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that. Yes,
it's interesting because I love blue. And I think the blue's really helpful, because when I was doing these works, I was thinking about women. I was thinking about women in general. And I was thinking about, this was happening at the time of the like huge Black Lives Matter movement as well in America. And I was thinking about a color that doesn't represent color in the way that we would think about it. You wouldn't look at it and go, that's a particular race. It's also a color that feels very noble. And also it has so many, I mean, I think blue has so many associated emotions that it helps you bring yourself to the painting when you're looking at it. So instead of you looking at the work and it alienating you, it invites you to see more. It can be regal, it can be lonely, it can be powerful. There's an artist, Lakshmi, I don't know her last name. She's on Instagram as this Lakshmi. She's amazing. She only paints in blue. And at some point I said to myself, I'm painting too much in blue, but then I saw her and I said, no, you're okay. Because I do incorporate other colors, but blue is really, I think, is really universal somehow and easy to relate to.
I think it's also what I'm interested in your work is that idea of light and dark, and that, you know, blue can be the sky, but it's also, you know, can be seen as depression. You know, it's those two very interesting points of creating a sort of memory or a thought, which I think you do very clearly with your paintings. I'm just going to move on now. Oop, she says, trying to There you go. We were kind of, I thought it was important to look at your paintings in relation to your work. And yes, we were thinking about, well, actually the other question which sort of comes before that is this time, and I was interested in the digital and whether there was anything from this period in the digital that you've taken and sort of run with, because I think we've all been quite sort of disparaging of the digital, I think, at the moment, and we've kind of had enough of it. But I was interested in how, actually whether there are any colours that came through for you on the digital, in the sort of digital realm that you used. And then just looking at these two very different parts of your work, and I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about both of them and the relationship they have to each other.
I really like these two images that you put next to each other, if I'm honest. That there's something, you've already set up a dialogue between the two, of the lines of the supermodel, and it's supermodel, and that's also obviously referencing objects that we normally, something we normally associate with a woman. But this is all like lines and balance, and that was all about the Vitruvian man, actually, and balance in a set space, and quite architectural kind of thinking behind it. And then the one next to it has set up a dialogue. I actually kind of feel like I want to sit with these two myself and just spend some time with them, because this sparks new ideas for me. But the process of painting and the process of designing or making, because I actually didn't make this piece, this was a collaborative piece where I designed it and I worked with an artisan to make this piece. But the process of designing this piece, I feel like I would love to say that actually there were very similar processes, but actually for this particular piece, they weren't similar processes. I knew I wanted to put in that chair a manifesto. I wanted to talk about geometric shapes, balance, proportions, in a way that when I'm painting, I'm exploring at the same time, if that makes sense.
But isn't it kind of like the precision of line, in fact, that they both have the precision of line? Oh yeah, and that negative space.
Oh, definitely. Oh yeah, definitely. All of those things are happening. But I guess I think when you're designing something, you can go through revisions, let's say. So I knew that was what I wanted to achieve, but the first draft didn't look like that. Whereas with the page, when you're painting, it's either going to turn out how you want or it's not. And that's fine as well, because there are many paintings that I was not happy with, but I was exploring and still am exploring, but I was exploring and, developing. But in the actual instant of creating, it's a different thing. Like, it has to work out or it doesn't.
Yeah, it's like magic as well.
Exactly, and sometimes you do it and it does it exactly how you want, and it's wonderful. And other times you just go, it's almost there, and then you try again. Whereas with design, it has, you have more time to embed meaning, I think, in that way. In that particular type of way I'm painting, and in that particular type of way this piece was designed.
But I think that's because you have a longer conversation with it. You have the conversation about materials, you have the conversation about joins. So then it has its own history just by the fact it takes longer to be in this world.
In a way, yes. But then I would say that that's what's interesting about the series of Women in Parts. It was 100. And if you look at the ones at the start, they are, even when I've looked back more recently, because I finished it a few months ago. But when I look back and look at the actual start and how it changed, I was talking to someone and they were like, you shouldn't have maybe included them all in one, series, because you started to explore different things as you were going on. And now they're caught in this one series, but at the start, you're really painting like this, and then you start to look at color, not just line, and then you've got color and line, and then, so maybe, do you know what I mean? So it kind of grew, and even though in that one cheer it might look, I'm allowed a longer conversation, I felt like by doing 100 paintings, it allowed me, again, a longer conversation that way.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I think that also painting is part of your practice. And like we can see this drawing here, and we discussed it, and actually the shapes within your drawing a while ago,
yeah,
the shapes. But actually I brought this up because you on your Instagram are wonderful about talking about other artists, and it's real education. And I tell them, you know, everybody follow Simone, and you get a really interesting insight into design and art. And I was just particularly struck by this image by Greg, that you talked about him being self-taught.
Yeah,
that interests me, because I think of you, you know, you've been to the Royal College, you've had this sort of great education, but actually, you know, you weren't taught to paint at the Royal College.
no.
So how much is, you know, how much is self-education, and how much is you know, real education?
Yeah, life education.
And the other, yeah, sorry, go on.
I think I love, like, I'm talking to a few people, I'm writing an article, I'm talking to a few people about their journeys, and I have to say, I think that the issue with learning, you know, doing the subject that you've learned and actually trying to take it into life, is that you have to try and unlearn so much of what they've taught you. Or let's say it another way, when you don't know that you're breaking the rules, you're free to break them without any concern, and it brings a different kind of freedom to the pieces that you create. And it means that you look at things in a different way. And I have had, like, I did study architecture and product design, and then I had ideas in jewellery, and I started to make those ideas with the knowledge I had. I feel like if we as creative people get so caught up in what we've been taught, we might not explore the extent of our creativity. You know, it's interesting that you have this bodyscapes drawing. I literally still I don't know how you found that. That's unreal. I was making these kind of drawings, and I guess there was something in me that wanted to come out. I don't think I had the confidence, if I'm honest. And I think that's part of why I respect people who are self-taught, because, you know, it does take some guts to come out and just decide, like, you know what, I'm just going to do this thing. It doesn't matter if I've someone, because I feel like part of education is actually giving you the permission to claim that you are able to do something. So, you know, if you've trained as a silversmith at a prestigious institution, or you've spent 10 years learning from as an apprentice and learning, you've both learned something, but you know, there's something of learning yourself and trusting yourself and trusting the fact that you're taking yourself on this journey that I think makes the work unique in a way.
I really hear what you're saying, and also I think, though, there's an element about education where you have some padding, and that you kind of have a knowledge that then means that you can do what you want. You've kind of got the back. I mean, having been to the Royal College too, there's a lot, I agree, that you have to kind of step outside of, but you also get to have that kind of, you know, that backbone, which is quite helpful.
Yeah. And I think I mean, I know why people do go to university, and it's not a nudge, it's not something against university at all. It's more an acknowledging that when you learn through doing, you end up doing something that's much more natural to yourself from the start, you know, and you'll make those mistakes, but they will genuinely be yours, and you'll bring that into the work, and maybe it adds more poetry to the pieces that you end up creating, instead of closing it off, let's say. I
mean, isn't that the relationship between intuitive and the rational? And that if
basically,
you sort of step into your intuitive.
Basically, that's exactly it. And I think as creative people, really the funny thing is, as creative people, I feel like we have a high intuition, but then you go to study your craft and you learn a lot of, let's say, the actual, as you put it, you learn a lot of things that you're meant to do, and that can sometimes take you away from your creativity. You can get caught up in it. Yeah. I think that it's interesting just to look at where individual journeys go when they're not, when they haven't been crafted in that kind of way. The connections that people make on the way to get to where they are in the end. Are you there, Jemima? I know you're on mute. You've got your mic.
Yeah, sorry, I've got mute. I've got my daughter cooking a cake, rather noisily, so you'll have to bear with me.
That's fine.
We're sort of back to materials and colours here, and I was curious as to kind of whether you chose your materials for their colour, or what comes first in your design practice, the materials or the colour. And the other thing that we haven't really talked about, and we didn't talk about in the last talk, was heritage. And actually, your parents, I believe, are from Trinidad and Jamaica.
Yeah.
And whether you draw on that in terms of, what colour you use. I mean, I know that I grew up, there's a colour for me, which is a sort of orange. My mum was an architect, and she painted our downstairs basement that orange, and it'll remain in me as a colour that's sort of integral to my colour palette.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering about that.
Okay, so in terms of materials, and what was it? How did you put it? What comes first, the material or the
colour? Do you choose copper because you love copper, or do you use copper because you love the colour of copper? Okay,
so I'd say neither come first. The idea comes first. And then the idea grows into a material, which grows into a colour, I would say. So for me, if I talk about what we have on the screen, so the vanity mirror, which is the one on which is the mirror, I want to create a mirror that's not a mirror, that's a gem. I want to create a mirror that distorts reflection, but only gives you a glimpse of being a mirror, which is only going to be one instance, and that ended up being the front, but the sides are rippled. I want to explore a process. How would I make this? What process do I need to use to make this piece? I want to explore, and then this comes together, and it's like, okay, so this is what I want to do, and then that's the kind of design process. And what material do you use? And it was between this and using brass. So do I want the color to be like a rose gold copper color, or do I want it to be gold? And then I said, you know what? And at the time, the price was actually the same. It was pretty much, so that wasn't going to be an issue for me. And I said, no, I want it to have, gold has too many other associated things with it. And for this piece, it can become distracting. So I want to use copper. And that's kind of, it came from the idea first, then it grew into the material. And I guess with the kind of the step stools, it's really, that grew from a previous idea I was exploring with materials. And that was actually more of an exploration in scale. So it was led by materials. And I think there are a few things, like I have a few commentaries on design, and one of them being that, when Adolf Loos said that decoration is crime, it really had such a huge impact on all of design, and still does. And we still look at decoration in a very particular way. And as a woman who designs it, I feel like there's restrictions around what you can do without being placed in a kind of a box of like female aesthetic or whatever. But I think that we can explore this idea of beauty, and it started that way. The idea again how can we bring beauty to pieces? And then because I was making jewellery at a smaller scale, I wanted to explore that at this scale. And those smaller scale pieces were in wood, so it just made sense to then explore it in wood. But I do have an affinity to dark wood. So similar to you, my childhood experience, I grew up in a home full of like sculptures, African sculptures and things, masks and things that my parents had collected when they were young and doing their travels, going to America and collecting things along the artists and using those pieces from their journey to create the home that I grew up in. And if you go to my house, like my house, I still call it my house. If you go to my parents' house, there's lots of dark wood furniture, like loads. The banister, the octagonal side tables that they got in an auction, there's everything is dark wood. And so the sculptures are dark wood, and they're of figures like carved African figures, and it always felt bold, and it felt natural somehow, and it felt like, I find wood to be a very relatable material. It's not cold like stainless steel, and it felt like something I wanted to make in and kind of elevate, because I feel like so many other materials are celebrated more than wood. So I wanted to use wood, and it's the way that I was using it with the turning to expose the grain and to really sculpt in that material. It made it kind of, it felt safe because it felt like home, but it also felt bold. It felt authentic. Yeah.
I mean, that whole conversation, which I think is another talk, but it's, decoration as design, I think is totally fascinating. And the kind of paring back of kind of today's aesthetic.
Yeah.
Leaves you with this very simple, very striking, very beautiful work that you do. I think that's an interesting conversation. I also love that you've mentioned banisters. I mean, our banisters in our house are probably the nicest bit of the whole house.
Really?
Yeah, they're made by my husband, and they're exquisite, and they're very basic, and they're not. But I think that it's kind of almost, it's going back to basics and then kind of reinventing in some way.
Yeah, and I feel like when I talk about my work, when I talk about how I create, I often talk about ingredients that I collect. And I feel like my parents' home had so many ingredients or seeds that were planted in my subconscious about materials and colors and how they can be combined. And I kind of have them in my creative cabinet to call on without even necessarily recognizing, well, on reflection, I see it, but at the time of creating, I didn't necessarily recognize how influential that kind of home space was for me.
It sort of impacts on your brain in some way. It's like you can't move out of it.
Totally. Totally. It's like it's I guess it kind of sets the base level of what's normal. My aesthetic normals were these materials. Wood is like totally has to be part of a lived environment for me. And dark wood, even more so. It's just, it's necessary to me almost. And that's kind of why it leapt into my jewellery, because they felt like objects that were substantial in their own right, and that when you actually wore them, it would imbue you with the kind of power that it has as an object in its own right.
Yes, the idea of sort of wood being part of your belonging, I think, in some
yeah, totally.
We're going to move on. It's a bit of a change of image, so everybody will have to bear with us. But it's the best image I could get of where the Now Gallery is, and that Kaya, Magda, and India and I work here. and that you're doing a project for us, which we're really excited about. You've actually got the tide here, and you can come and walk along the river, and it's beautiful. And we've been talking about a bench that you're going to design for us called the Listening Bench, which we're really excited about, which is really a place that people can come and talk, and is a sort of anti-COVID bench, so that people can have a sort of discussion. And I know that you haven't formulated any particular ideas necessarily, but I suppose what my question was, how do you make commission a sort of creative journey? So when you get commissioned, how do you sort of make it work for you? Because I think we can be prescriptive and say, we want it in this color and want it like this, do this, and I'm sure that must happen with commissions. How do you own it?
It goes back to what I said before. That's a really good question. And I think, to be honest, I think that's the struggle of a lot of new designers. And maybe it's the struggle of designers everywhere, because it can be really frustrating to bring yourself into the work while still trying to answer the requirements of a brief. There's a few things I would say is like, normally people come to you if you're not actively seeking a client, or if you've established a name, they're coming to you because they already believe in the vision and the world that you've started to make through your objects. So that already means that there is some common ground for conversation to be had, right? And then I would say that, remember I said I have a cupboard, like an ingredients cupboard. And in that cupboard, I have different materials, different aesthetics, ideas, things that I've researched. And when I go to create a piece, I'll go into my cupboard and I'll bring some of myself to the work, because obviously they're my natural spices, let's say. But I will also, if you're a good chef, you're also bringing in other cultures all the time. You're not just using the same 5 ingredients. So the client will come and their requirements are other ingredients that have to be incorporated. Now, the proportion at which this is put together is going to vary depending on what's been designed or what's been created and what's been asked. But normally that's how it starts. It's like, what do I have to bring to the table and what do you have? How can we mix this? How can we collaborate to make something that's going to work, that I can be proud of, but that you really can love as well?
Well, I know we will. I'm very excited about it. And particularly, I think, in your use of materials, and we've discussed trying to make it sustainable and use material that has a sustainable quality. I wondered if you could talk a bit about your philosophy to material.
I can say a lot about my ideas behind materials. I think that value and materiality are intertwined, and that we have inherent ideas of what things are worth because of the materials that we use. And I'm constantly interested in twisting that. If you look at a lot of high-end luxury furniture, it's always, a lot of it uses really, brass, very expensive brass, I said brass, I meant bronze, sorry, and very expensive materials. And I do stick with wood quite a lot, simply because I've said it already today, but I respect it so much. And I guess I'm kind of lucky that I have my partner's a tree surgeon, and I can build up my access to wood in a more accessible way. But realistically, I think it's one of the best materials that I think is out there. In terms of eco, I guess, the other materials I find concrete, it's just not as natural to me. That's how I'd say it. Yeah.
It's like having an affinity with it.
Yeah.
It's really kind of, it's like, you're born of the same material in some way. You're connected with it, I think.
Yeah, and I guess, but the thing is, it's funny because I love metal, and I do when I was at uni, I actually spent pretty much most of the first year welding. Welding in the workshops and bending metal, and I felt really, it was actually so fun. And I guess it's because I was drawing in space. The way I was creating, I was making lots of lines and drawing in space, and it was quite beautiful. And I still am very interested in that aesthetic, because, and the freedom that came with creating in that way. But I really think it's about looking at how we value materials, and I guess that's why I spent so much time with wood as well, because I feel like it's undervalued, and it might be just a little bit too easy to make something valuable just by using really expensive materials. I don't think that's the way it should work, really.
Just because you use precious materials doesn't make it precious. I think that's
what I'm getting at, exactly. Yeah.
And this piece, which I love for its sensuality and its use of materials, I'm hoping that India's sent you out. There's a lovely blog post that you've written about this particular text, and I think it's really important. It's about how we perceive the body, how we interpret race, how art relates to our daily reality.
Yeah.
I think that I wondered how much your work has changed, whether those are the things that still preoccupy you. This is 2010. Have your attitudes changed about? And I think you talk about speaking out and creating objects for daily life in a really intuitive way. Yeah,
I for me, this was probably the first piece of work that I really consider my first. I've got lots of pieces that I've made before this, but this is really when I would say I started to embrace my position and find my voice. So I wanted to speak from a place that I felt was not really visible in the design world, and bring all of those things that you mentioned, the female form and the sensuality, the domesticity, this is talking about the history of slavery is in there. Like, there's so much going on, and what I would say is I don't need to bring all of those things into every piece I make. Like I said, not all of the ingredients have to go into everything that you make when you go to create. But what I would say is I am interested in creating pieces that give voice to what I feel is missing in the design world, and that's kind of people from different cultures other than the Western one. The aesthetic that we normally associate with the Western design world is driven by, when you go to a design education, that's what the central focus is on. And I want to embrace that, but I also want to embrace my heritage and bring them together in the pieces that I make.
Which neatly ties us into the next slide perfectly.
Yes.
This is our last slide, everybody, so please do get your questions to us, and we're really looking forward to having those. I hadn't actually heard of Adelaide before your talk, which I saw on Instagram, and was sort of blown away by her sort of intelligence and wit, and her starting her career as a scientist, and then becoming an artist, but having had no connections. And I think that whole thing we're talking about, I mean, the question really began, color, which is what we are talking about, also has many meanings, and we need to talk about diversity in design, because it's not a comfortable thing to be talking about, but it just sort of isn't happening. And I thought the conversation that you had with her was so sort of honest and intrinsic to how we should be addressing these themes right now.
I mean, it was great to talk to Adelaide, and we spoke about, it was great as well because there were things that came up that I didn't even have a clue about. How she started, again, she was self-taught artist. She started out as a chemist. And yeah, I feel my perspective on diversity in design and is not just about the number of people of color in design. That's kind of what I was trying to touch on before in the Negros and Mammy. It's not just that. When you go to learn about design, it's very much Eurocentric, and that's, in many ways, that's fine. But I think there's space to definitely teach people to bring themselves to their work. And that was something I was very focused on when I was teaching. I was very focused on the idea that, we in the Western world, this is how we look at it. Okay, so what of yourself can you bring and combine with these ideas to create something new, and not just to try and, in a way, to fit in. Because really, I feel like that's by looking beyond to what you already have in yourself, that's when you're gonna create your best work. And Adelaide using her body, and she said that she had to break away from the idea that she had to be a literal figurative painter to be a real painter. By breaking away from that and really questioning what she wanted to do and what she wanted to say, she started to make her best work. That's how she moved into the artist that she is now. And again, I mean, we spoke about blue before. Blue's in her work a lot. I haven't spoken to her about why she uses blue, but it definitely captures a lot of the emotions that I hope are in my pieces about power, about, I think it allows people to view in a very different way as a color.
Yeah, I'm not even sure what to say about these two works together, because they seem to have such a kind of an interesting, correlation. And I think it goes back again to that being able to express really profound subjects that you want to get through to other people with a light touch. Again, which I think the blue does. It's kind of profound, but you also have a sense that you want to, I think you kind of want to spread spread a thought, and you do it in a kind of humorous way, I think, which is exciting. And I think as well, she has a sort of a humor about her work, which is kind of profound, and that's great. Right, we're going to stop sharing. I can see from the chat that we should have some questions, I'm hoping, or maybe we actually haven't got any questions in the Q&A. Magda, how's it looking on the question front?
Hi, yes, we've got a few. So I'll just go ahead. The first one is from Chris, and it's, is there a relationship between your architecture training and the paintings? And how were you taught to consider colour during your architecture education?
My architecture education, I think to be fair, when you're training, you take yourself on your own journey and your tutors kind of guide you. And when I was there, I was much more concerned about materials. I think I ended up going to study my master's because I was on the making unit and I loved making. And it wasn't really about color for me. It was about material. To go back to a question I was asked before. Yeah, I guess that's what it was. And in terms of, did you say painting and drawing, like what I learned whilst I was in architecture and when I paint, one of the best things that a tutor said to me when I was at architecture school, he said, I kept on making my drawings, and they had to fit into an A1 page because that was the biggest paper I could find. And he said, stop making your ideas fit the page and make the page as big as you need your idea to be. That is something that stayed with me, still with me now. And I think that's more important than learning a way of painting, holding a pen. You learn all of these things when you study in architecture, but that way of thinking was more valuable to me than many other things that I learned in architecture school.
That's such a great piece of advice. It really is. It's fantastic. I was wondering whether you consider yourself now to be a designer, a craftsperson, an artist, and also kind of looking to the future. If in 10 years' time, how do you imagine your practice to be? I mean, that's a difficult question, but I just wondered where you feel you're heading. Is it more paintings? Is it more design?
I think that's a really good question. And realistically, I'm quite fluid. And I've been speaking to jewelers recently, and those conversations have been making me want to make more jewellery and might be much more confident in the time scale it takes to make jewellery. I've in the past been reluctant to really immerse myself in it because there starts to be a demand that you create on a time scale. They want to put you in the kind of fashion world time scale, which is something that I never felt comfortable with. But I'm making, designing pieces of furniture, and I'm painting. And really it's about, I think realistically what will happen is, it's about where I feel I can speak the clearest on the thing that I want to say at the time. And right now, painting is giving me a really amazing access to my voice, let's say. And it's engaging people, and it's allowing conversations like this, I feel. But it might become sculpture, because that was the initial idea for the paintings, was to lead it to sculpture. And it might, again, become a product, because part of why I make these pieces is because I feel that there aren't enough products that speak about what I want to speak about too. So I do think it will become more artistic and less structured by the usual confinements of design, but I don't think that I will ever completely stop making pieces of design. And if I can be a little bit cheeky, I feel like questions like that don't really help, because when you're creating, you just want to have access to good projects. You want to create amazing things, but it doesn't help for me to think, if I'm going to close myself off from something. I'm much more interested about thinking what doors open through my creativity, as opposed to what doors close.
I think but again, I think that's an interesting thing to think about in terms of just product design, which I've always been interested in, that your paintings go out to one person. I mean, obviously they're on your Instagram feed, so anybody can see them, but I do love the idea of product design and making something which then goes onto every household's table and makes it a better place.
There's definitely, see, that's the thing, that's actually why I'm still interested in it, to be honest. I do think that we need to be nurturing different voices. Like I said, we should be nurturing different voices. We should be looking at design as it, and it is amazing. I don't want to sound like I don't think there's amazing design out there. There is totally a world of amazing design. I just want to be part of that voice. I want people to be able to engage with what I make. And so I don't think I'll ever completely step away from it. And obviously I love making, so I'm not going to completely step away from it at all. It's just that, as I said, maybe there are things that I want to say that I find you can't say in the design world. Because when I created that piece, the Negress and Mammy, I was younger. I want to say 10 years younger. I was 11 years younger than I am now. I was in my mid-20s when I done that piece, right? And I didn't realize it was going to be so controversial. I didn't realize it was going to be so difficult. I just wanted to make a piece that had all of those things to say. I didn't realize it was going to be maybe difficult to live with a piece like that, or, that furniture is normally an object that serves you as opposed to make statements. And I kept on making these statements in my work. And at some point I said, it's not the work that's difficult, it's the world that I'm placing this work in. If this work was exactly the same piece, but I exposed it initially to the art world, we'd be much more relaxed about having the conversations that come up. But when you frame it within the design world, and having to live with this piece in your own home, you then have a whole different world of issues come up. And so context becomes a thing, because the paintings that I make could become textiles, or they could become, I just saw Jemima Burrill done a collaboration with Zara, and he's got a whole bunch of jumpers out. Your creativity is your voice, and where you place it is up to you. So for me, I'm much more interested in continuing to tune, to like find my voice, to tune it, to become the master of it. And then it's more like where I direct it will be up to me in a way.
I think the whole analogy of finding a voice is sort of key, because I think it's that you sow your voice into the work that you do, and actually, as you said, making the dividing it up into, this is my artistic practice, this is my craft practice, and it is not helpful, because actually they're kind of interwoven, and you just can't separate them. I understand that.
Yeah, totally.
And Magda, I think I've butted in, because as I said before, Simone, there's so many questions I have. I've got kind of lists of them. Were there any other questions that you wanted to put to her?
Yes, so we've had another one from Amy, and she says, there's so much joy in your work. Are you tempted to scale these beautiful paintings into huge scale? They would look fabulous as projections on buildings, almost seeing them in process as the video shows.
Yeah, if anyone wants to commission me, I'm open for that. No, but definitely, the thing is, Instagram is a tool where I share my work, but I've been lucky enough to have private commissions during this period, and I've done some really quite large pieces for some triptychs for some private clients that came up. And because they're private clients, I can't share them with everyone. But I mean, the pieces are just getting bigger and bigger, and they're much more, I love it. I've got a piece behind me, I think, on canvas, and that's the biggest I've done on canvas so far. But, you know, the more, it just opens up more ideas and possibilities, and I'm really loving it. So if anyone wants me to put them on to paint, make a creation for the side of the building, I'm happy to. Yes, that's what I'd say to that.
Great,
the bigger the better.
Exactly.
The next one's from Priya, and it's, what are your thoughts on the decolonisation of the art museum and how art spaces can be more inclusive and accessible to artists like yourself?
That is an amazing question, and it's going to require a whole another hour and a half to talk about, and we will still not scratch the surface. I think that museums are in a very tricky position right now, and they don't necessarily, I don't know how much they genuinely want to change, but we as the public are in a very powerful position where we can engage with creativity and people doing interesting things. And the museum, if they choose not to go along that journey, they're going to get left behind. They're going to start losing their funding, because, you know, to be honest, museums need funding. And if audiences turn up, they're fine. And if they've accessed an audience that will continually turn up, they will not have to address any of the issues that you've just outlined. But as other things start to come up, as people start to collaborate, as new voices come out, if they choose not to engage with them and their audience decides to move with these new voices, then guess what? They're going to lose that stability, and they're going to have to change. But by that time, it might be too late. So I think that we've got a lot of museums now also looking at the realities of how they've got their collections. You know, we've got amazing, I love the museums in this country, and I really appreciate having access to them, and having access to them for free, essentially, you know, unless it's a private show, I can go into these museums. But I think that what we really need is, we need them to be honest about how these things have been acquired. It's really about transparency. I think we know our own history, and it's just that when you go to these spaces, instead of acknowledging how a lot of these things have been acquired, that there's silence, and that's the more frustrating than anything. And moving forward, the more we actually talk, will feel as if people of colour I'm talking about will feel as if they can engage with these spaces. And the more we're actually genuinely educating the wider population, because that's something that we're not doing by ignoring you know, a problematic history, let's say.
Definitely.
Thank you for that, Magda. I think that's all the questions we've got, which is great. Thank you for those.
Oh, sorry, I have one more. Someone wanted you to repeat the name of the artist that only paints in blue that you mentioned earlier.
Her name, she's on, look, I'm literally getting my phone because I know her name is Lakshmi, but her Instagram handle is this Lakshmi, which is THISLAKSHMI on Instagram. She's amazing. She's based in Wembley, which is really close to where I grew up. And she paints female forms, deconstructed female forms in blue. And her way of painting and teaching painting is about re-looking at the female form and encouraging people to kind of embrace the beauty that they find in themselves. Her work's amazing. Have a look.
That sounds, I'm wondering if whether India got that. Oh, she's put it up. My goodness. So fantastic. Thank you, India. India also found that beautiful drawing from a while ago that you did. So we've got good people in the background here.
Yeah.
I would just like to say, I mean, I've written down rather a lot, but I felt that it was interesting that you talked about silence, and that's what we have to be so aware of. We cannot be silent. And that is an ongoing conversation. And I love that you talked about the fact that you have an access to your voice. And I think that also the whole idea of kind of recipes and the way that you pick and choose, and that you have an incredibly discerning eye about what textures, what flavors you're going to bring to your work. And it works, sublimely. And I think you mentioned the idea of, being bold and safe and sensual and powerful. And I think that, that's all part of your work. And it's been such a treat to talk to you. And I think we all just desperately need this kind of conversation right now, because I think we're all feeling, like a desert, that we haven't got cultural conversations. We need that cultural conversation. So it's been a treat to talk to you, and I'll stop blabbing on. But thank you very much. And thank you all for turning up. We wouldn't do it without you. If we were talking to no one, we couldn't do this. So thank you for coming. Have very good evenings, and yes, we've got Liz West on April the 6th with Kaya Charles, and that'll be another wonderful talk.
Thank you.